Well, look at who's suddenly number 2 in the conference. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. If you have not already subscribed, go ahead and do that below. Today, we're discussing key takeaways from the Brooklyn Nets West Coast road trip, a series of games that featured the likes of the Golden State Warriors, the Sacramento Kings, the Phoenix Suns, and the Los Angeles Lakers, during which the Nets just happened to go 4-0. But enough talking, let's get into the first takeaway from these last 4 games. The game against the Phoenix Suns was perhaps Steve Nash's best game as a head coach, whipping out a multitude of adjustments, the first one being on defense. Against the Suns, the Nets opened in what's known as a drop coverage, which is the style of defense that Brooklyn has played pretty much since DeAndre Jordan first landed in Brooklyn. It's a conservative scheme by nature. On pick and rolls, the center hangs back in the paint to dissuade at-rim shots, leaving the ball handler's defender effectively on his own as he attempts to navigate screens to recover back to his man. Against the Suns, who boast 2 of the best mid-range shooters in the league, Devin Booker and Chris Paul, this wasn't exactly a viable solution. By nature, drop coverage concedes the middle of the floor, and Devin Booker and Chris Paul, 2 elite mid-range shooters, happily obliged at the opportunity. In the second half, Nash came out with an adjustment, switched DeAndre Jordan on literally everything. Take a look at this play. DeAndre Jordan is playing much higher up the floor when Dario Saric sets this screen. And because of his positioning, it's easier for him to switch on to Suns backup point guard Cameron Payne. Payne resets at the top of the key and attempts to isolate, but DeAndre Jordan does a really nice job staying with the speedy guard all the way to the basket to thoroughly contest the shot. The Nets even felt comfortable enough with switching DeAndre Jordan onto both of the Suns superstars. You can tell DeAndre Jordan's positioning, at least relative to where he was in the first half, kind of flummoxes Devin Booker for a second. He just wasn't expecting to see him there. And this eventually leads to Dario Saric receiving the ball in the post, receiving a timely double team from Chris Chiozza and Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot, and then a 3 from Dario Saric that clangs up the side of the rim. Switching also took away Chris Paul's patented mid-range shots that he loves to take so much out of pick and roll sets. Jordan picks up Paul right at the elbow when he likes to launch those shots, and that forces a reset and eventual missed 3. Even on sets like Double Drag, in which the opposition uses 2 perpendicular screens in transition to create open looks for the ball handler, the Nets were willingly using DeAndre Jordan as a switching piece in the defense. Normally, the Nets would hope that one of Bruce Brown or James Harden would get around both of these screens to stay pace with Chris Paul, but on Tuesday, it was DeAndre Jordan who was meeting Chris Paul on the other side, while James Harden picked up DeAndre Ayton and Bruce Brown picked up Jay Crowder. Double Drag is not exactly an easy action to defend, and it's a set that teams have run against the Nets before, and you can learn more about that on my channel, so I'd call this a pretty fluid exchange. Even on screens away from the ball, the Nets willingly switched DeAndre Jordan to snuff out spot-up shots. On this low pin down where DeAndre Ayton sets a screen that faces the basket for Devin Booker to streak off of, notice how James Harden and DeAndre Jordan exchange matchups to force Devin Booker into the fadeaway shot. Here's a look at when the Nets don't switch this action, with DeAndre Jordan hanging back and drop and sticking with DeAndre Ayton, leaving Bruce Brown on his own to recover around that pin down screen, which eventually gives Devin Booker a pretty clean look. But Nash wasn't done. He also pulled out a play from James Harden's pass. For those of you familiar with Mike D'Antoni's playbook, you might recognize this one. Inverted pick and roll is a play we've talked about on this channel before. It's a play the Rockets earned quite a bit of notoriety for. The setup is very similar to a traditional pick and roll, in which one player sets a ball screen for another to take advantage of open space. Where they differ is the actual setup. Instead of a big man screening for a ball handler, it's the ball handler who's screening for the big man. And this creates all types of mismatches and generally confuses the defense. Big man defenders aren't usually used to scooting around screens, as they're usually on the other side of this equation, and the same can be said for the ball handler's defender. They're not used to keeping both players in front at all costs. The first time we saw the inverted pick and roll was actually without Harden on the floor. Landry Shamet, one of Brooklyn's ball handlers, set a ball screen for Jeff Green that left Dario Saric stumbling. He just didn't see it coming. And it's clear the coaching staff liked what they saw, because they brought it back later once Harden was actually inserted back into the game. I had the opportunity to ask Steve Nash about the Jeff Green, James Harden inverted pick and roll. Here's what he had to say.
And then as far as James picking for Jeff, we've played with that a little bit before. I think we did it a bit in the Golden State game and maybe Sacramento, but when they wanted to keep Ayton out there, that they were switching, it was an opportunity for us to get Ayton on James and try to manipulate the matchups a little bit. So, we stuck with that. We, in timeouts, I didn't even draw anything up in the last couple timeouts. I said, try to find that switch, and you guys be clever in how you can try to maneuver and get the switch, and we'll space the floor.
Here's James Harden setting a ball screen for Jeff Green, who drives, kicks back to James Harden. Harden drives, drawing in the help from Bridges, leading to the open three for Jeff Green. Same thing a minute later. Harden sets the ball screen. Jeff Green dribbles away from that screen to pull Bridges away from Harden. Harden isolates against DeAndre Ayton and scores at the rim even as Bridges rotates over. Brooklyn mixed in some traditional pick and roll to keep the defense on its toes a minute later. Jeff Green sets the screen on Bridges to once again give Harden the mismatch with DeAndre Ayton. Ayton does a pretty good job shading Harden right until Harden hits a series of mean crossovers, giving Harden a top foot to attack off of, and eventually Brooklyn ends up with a corner three. And then finally, Brooklyn went back to that inverted pick and roll that was so successful. With Harden setting a screen, Phoenix hedge and recovers masterfully, with Bridges leaving his man James Harden to swipe at Jeff Green for a second while DeAndre Ayton recovers back into the play. But then Harden re-screens on the other side of DeAndre Ayton's body. And Jeff Green rejects that screen by going the opposite direction of that screen, which of course catches Ayton by surprise as he was expecting Jeff Green to go left, where the screen is. And this pulls the Nets within one before James Harden hit the huge pull-up three. Bruce Brown's cutting has been nothing short of a revelation for the Brooklyn Nets offense, highlighted by his 18 points against the Golden State Warriors. For a guy who shoots 17% from three, the Nets, stuffed with shooters, have been the perfect ecosystem for Brown to thrive in. When Brooklyn rolls out a Kyrie Irving, Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, James Harden lineup, it takes up a majority of the defense's attention. And on this clip, with Harris, KD, and James Harden clumped together in the same area on the right wing, Golden State's defense is loaded up onto one side due to all of that shooting gravity. Brown notices this and cuts to the basket the second Curry rotates over to stop ball on Kyrie Irving's drive, and it results in an easy layup for Bruce. Same idea here. Draymond Green plays off of Bruce Brown to help with KD in the post. So in response, Brown cuts to the basket, which forces Steph Curry to attempt to stunt and recover, where he fakes it Bruce Brown to get him to give up the rock, only to retreat back to his original man. But he doesn't get there in time, as Brown only has to make a shorter distance pass to Tyler Johnson in the corner for the three. Same idea as the last clip. The second that Draymond Green doubles James Harden on the drive, Bruce is making his way to the rim. He flashes that offensive rebounding skill set as well in this clip. Brown's cutting has also been used as a zone buster of sorts when the opposition opts for a 2-3 look. As we all know with the zone, there are two players assigned to guarding up top, two players assigned to guarding the corners, and one playing a little more center field closer to the basket. What this means is that the middle of the floor is open, and typically that's the best way to beat a 2-3 zone, which is exactly what Bruce Brown, a super cunning cutter, does here. You'll notice Stephen Curry attempt to direct traffic a little bit and figure out who of his Warrior teammates is picking up Bruce Brown in the middle of the floor. And when three Warrior players commit, a simple swing from Kyrie Irving to James Harden gives Brooklyn the wide open three. These are the type of plays that can occur with a 2-3 zone. Because players are assigned with specific areas of the floor, the zone itself can collapse rather easily when a player cuts middle. Brown's ability to cut into open space allows him to play a small ball 5 role on offense. Because really, what is a role? It's a cut to the basket after setting a screen. And on this play against the Kings, Brown delivers a dime of a pass to Joe Harris on the short roll. The short roll, of course, being a roll where a player rolls halfway to the basket before stopping and deciding if they want to take a shot or find a teammate on the perimeter with a pass. Brooklyn has even toyed with using Bruce Brown in the dunker spot, which are the two spots right underneath the basket in which non-shooting centers usually tend to hang out when they're not setting screens. You'll see here what type of spacing Bruce Brown in the dunker spot can create. As James Harden makes his way to the basket, De'Aaron Fox rotates over as the low man to help Marvin Bagley, which puts Harrison Barnes in a pretty tricky spot when Bruce Brown inches over closer to the rim. It's Barnes' job to do what's known as a sink where he picks up Bruce Brown, originally covered by De'Aaron Fox, once Fox rotates over to stop the ball. From there, Barnes has to recover back out to his original man, Jeff Green, and try to contest the shot. And the Kings get pretty lucky that Jeff misses the wide open look. There won't be much film from the Lakers game, as it was kind of a weird game with both teams trying to feel each other out. But here, Bruce Brown camps out in that right dunker spot, and when Marc Gasol rotates over to stop the ball, it's an easy layup plus the foul for Bruce Brown. Teams are starting to scout Bruce Brown's cutting a little bit more. Just watching the Suns game, it was very clear that Jay Crowder had watched some film from Brown's breakout performance against Golden State. But when the full Nets team is healthy, I expect Brown's cutting to be a pretty crucial part of the offense. Ever since the Indiana game, DeAndre Jordan has showed some real signs of life on offense, particularly as a roller and a passer from the elbows. Similar to Kenny Atkinson in last January, Steve Nash has started to run more plays for DeAndre Jordan in the high post. In particular, the Nets love this high post split, with DeAndre Jordan clutching the rock at the elbow, while two of the Nets' many guards form a crisscross pattern and break apart from one another. From there, it turns into read and react for DeAndre Jordan. In the first clip, that means a James Harden step back. In the second, it's a pass to Tyler Johnson, who cuts down the seam for the easy layup at the rim. And in the third, Kyrie Irving makes the Kings pay for their confusion while switching, as De'Aaron Fox is a little bit slow to catch up to Tyler Johnson, who pops for three but ultimately doesn't make the shot. Jordan's rolls to the basket have been especially impactful in some of Brooklyn's recent performances. Against the Suns, Jordan's rolls were a huge reason James Harden was able to coerce so many isolations against Suns center DeAndre Ayton. In this first clip, DeAndre is able to physically pull Jay Crowder away from the play with this rim run, making it impossible for Crowder to switch back onto James Harden, leading to the isolation against Ayton. Here, seeing that the Lakers are playing an incredibly aggressive style of pick and roll defense by sending two players to the ball to get it out of James Harden's hands, DeAndre slips his screen and streaks into the open space for the eventual alley-oop. On this play, with Corey Joseph guarding James Harden, DeAndre's early roll makes it very tough for Kings center Hassan Whiteside to play the cat and mouse game, where he keeps James Harden and DeAndre Jordan in front of him while Corey Joseph recovers back into the play, and that gives Harden the room to launch that patented teardrop left-handed layup. And even here, by rolling at the very last second, it makes it impossible for Bridges to double Harden in the corner. And here's the big guy again doing the exact same thing, timing his screen and roll perfectly so that Bridges is removed from the play. And it's all James Harden from there, who splits the defense and gets to the rim with ease. In the last week, Steve Nash has expressed some optimism about his team's understanding of the basic defensive scheme, and just watching the Nets switch this week, I really can't say I disagree. Brooklyn has been successful at keeping the ball up top, and what I mean by that is the Nets are doing a better job of disallowing any drives or rim runs on opposing pick and rolls or handoff sets. You'll notice that here as Kyrie Irving does a wonderful job trailing Buddy Hield around this ultra rare Sacramento Kings triple screen set. The Kings then flow into pick and roll with Hield and Hassan Whiteside, and Irving does a nice job once again trailing Buddy Hield, knowing that he doesn't really pressure the basket, so all he really has to take away is that mid-range shot. Hield kicks back out to De'Aaron Fox. The two of them engage in a pick and roll. Irving and Bruce Brown switch, and Irving is slightly behind the play, so Bruce Brown scoots over to stop De'Aaron Fox's drive. And while that's happening, Kyrie Irving does a wonderful job recovering over to Buddy Hield to snuff out the pick and pop shot. The possession eventually stagnates as Bruce Brown gets a hand on the pass back to De'Aaron Fox, and Brooklyn earns themselves a Sacramento airball. Here's Kyrie and Bruce doing similar things on what looks to be a variation of pistol from Sacramento. As a reminder, pistol is when a ball handler dribbles to a wing on the sideline, and a big man positions himself at the top of the key to get involved in that play by, say, setting a flare screen. Being that the Nets are a team that's heavily influenced by Mike D'Antoni's Rockets, the Nets snuff out this action early, with Kyrie and Bruce Brown exchanging matchups as De'Aaron Fox dribbles toward Buddy Hield on that sideline. And you'll notice this makes it much easier to keep the ball up top and dissuade Sacramento from any dribble drive penetration that can scramble the defense. Another possession against the Kings. This time Landry Shamet helps out Tyler Johnson by stunting at Tyrese Halliburton on the drive, only to recover back to his man Corey Joseph. Johnson and Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot then switch on this Tyrese Halliburton, Glenn Robinson III pick and roll to coerce Tyrese Halliburton into the pull-up three. Also, check out James Harden going over the Hassan Whiteside screen to take away the passing lane to Nemanja Bjelica in the corner. Playing Jeff Green at the 5 has its pluses and minuses, but one of them is that he can functionally play at the level and fully participate in Brooklyn's switching defense to force a guard like Stephen Curry to give up the rock to a teammate. Also, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot does a nice job staying with Steph just long enough to make sure that Jeff Green fully picks him up before peeling back to Damian Lee on the pick and pop shot. More goodness from Jeff Green at the 5. He picks up Stephen Curry after Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot is nailed by this flare screen. He stays with Curry, arguably the best off-ball player in the league, all throughout his entire cut in the half court, before passing Curry off to Brooklyn's best individual defender on the team, Kevin Durant, who nearly picks Curry's pocket and forces up a one-handed miss. Even on switches in the post, which were a huge problem for the Nets early on, the Nets are much improved at switching themselves out of bad cross matches. Here, James Harden scrams Kyrie Irving out of the post mismatch against Harrison Barnes, and with a simple exchange, he kicks Kyrie Irving out to Corey Joseph in the corner. As we all know, James Harden is a pretty tenacious post defender, and Harrison Barnes gets stripped by Harden on his turnaround shot. The Nets didn't switch often against the Lakers, but when they did, they made sure to add a little bit of extra oomph to it. And you'll see that here, after Joe Harris and Kyrie Irving exchange matchups, Irving makes sure to bump Kyle Kuzma a little bit, which eventually leads to the turnover. This is a combination of a lot of the things we've covered. Bruce Brown and Landry Shamet do a nice job of keeping the ball up top as Devin Booker and Cameron Payne engage in a back and forth handoff. DeAndre Jordan is playing nice and high to stop Devin Booker on this pick and roll. And then when the ball is entered to DeAndre Ayton in the post, who has a mismatch with Landry Shamet, James Harden rotates over to help. Now in recovery mode, the Nets do a great job of locating the remaining unguarded Suns players, with Bruce Brown rotating out to Cameron Payne and Landry Shamet finding his way to Jay Crowder in the corner. Kudos to DeAndre for sticking it out to the very end and contesting this Devin Booker three-pointer. The reason I chose this clip is I wanted to show you that even in recovery mode, the Nets' defensive rotations are improving dramatically game to game. We'll end on this. Bruce Brown and James Harden switch nicely on this Devin Booker, Jay Crowder dribble handoff. The Suns flow into a Spain pick and roll, which is very similar to a normal pick and roll, except there's a third player, usually a guard or wing, that sets a back screen, which is a screen that faces the opposite baseline, for the roller to create open space at the rim. But again, Brooklyn sniffs this out perfectly, with James Harden and DeAndre Jordan communicating so that Jordan sneaks around the Devin Booker back screen. Phoenix improvises, sets up a DeAndre Ayton, Chris Paul pick and roll, which again, DeAndre Jordan does a nice job playing up high against, which forces Chris Paul to loft the ball over the top to DeAndre Ayton. And again, Brooklyn does a nice little double team down low to force up the turnover. All in all, this has been a very successful road trip of Brooklyn Nets basketball. The team has continued to improve on defense while also working in some of its less explosive offensive players into the offense. And I'd say this is probably Steve Nash's best week as a head coach, period. He's just starting to look really comfortable. The timeouts have been great, the adjustments have been even better. I'm recording this on Saturday night, so we'll see if anything changes by the time the game against the Clippers rolls around. But for now, if you're a Nets fan, you have a lot to be excited about. And with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe, and go ahead and throw this video on Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. As usual, follow me on Twitter. All my work is there, and I just wanted to thank you guys again for watching this. I know it was a little bit of a longer video. Peace!